and make sure that they don't care whether I'm an athlete or not. Okay. And then number two is understanding, well, why did I love football in the first place? Why do I love sports outside of ego? And for me, I recognized that it was, I love a physical, mental, and emotional challenge. I love the adrenaline rush. I love putting myself in situations where I have to fight out of it, where I am challenged and I have to work through it. So then it's, okay, now how can I do this on a daily basis? And how can I apply this to a larger picture of life? And so I looked at my relationships, I looked at my faith, and then I looked at, business and career. And how can I apply that in each one of those levels? Right. And so then it comes down to making choices. And then I'm choosing, okay, every single day to get my physical challenge, I'm going to work out. And do I miss that sometimes? Yeah, absolutely.
You are listening to the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast, transforming athletes into leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. Our guest of the day is Colin Jonov. Colin is a former college football player at University of Pittsburgh, and he's also the founder and CEO of Athletic Fortitude. Welcome to the show, Colin.
I appreciate you having me, man.
Of course. So let's dive right in. Let's talk a little bit about, before we talk about Athletic Fortitude and the work you do with that, I'd love to give the listeners some context on how the sports in general just made an impact on your life beyond the scoreboard.
Yes, I mean, from the time I was little, I was kind of just obsessed with sports. I don't know how much of it is genetic or upbringing or a combination, but I think pretty much everything, not everything, but majority of the things in my life that I'm proud of are due to sports, and whether that's my mental makeup, my ability to handle tough times or whatever, my work ethic, whatever you want to call it, I think all kind of stems from my athletic background and, how it's shaped me and molded me into the person that I've become, and, to continue to mold me into the person that I want to.
Like that. Yeah, it's just a culmination and an important part of your life. And I know we're going to talk a lot about how sports shape our identity for better or for worse. But before we kind of dive into that, how do you think sports kind of shaped your identity growing up, playing high school football and obviously college football and having a couple days in the NFL?
Yeah, for sure. So we can talk about the good and the bad. And, we'll start with the bad because I always like ending with the good. So the way that, sports shaped my identity for the bad was that's really all I identified as was an athlete, as a football player. So anytime someone would talk to me or ask me to introduce myself, I would say, I'm a football player. And it didn't matter what else I had going for me, what else was going for me in my life. It was only football all the time, only being an athlete all the time. And that's ego, right? It inflated my ego because I was attached to that, something so fragile I was attached to. And when I say fragile, I mean, it can be taken away at any moment in time. So when we look at the good, and what took me a long time to learn how to reflect on this, is athletics can shape your identity. And it is a part of your identity, and that's okay. But it's important to understand how it shapes you and why it shapes you. So you look at all the things athletics teaches you. It teaches you how to work with people. It teaches you teamwork, time management, discipline, how to do hard things, how to overcome pain, how to work through adversity, how to pick yourself literally up from the ground each time you smack it and get up and take another step forward. And learning that is part of my identity. And I learned that through athletics, right? So, being, gritty, being tenacious, being kind and empathetic, learning how to communicate, being someone who is disciplined, right? All those things came from athletics and come from athletics. And it's not, I'm a football player. It's, I'm all these things partially because of football.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. So can you share any of those stories of, challenging times that you had when you're like, I'm a football player, when you had potentially bad games or, moments where, that identity of being so wrapped up into kind of the fragility of football, and maybe it was kind of your transition from being an athlete into kind of the working world?
Yeah, I think the two main places that I saw it were an injury and then when I finally left the game. And both are because I was no longer involved in the game. So when you look at being injured, right? The key things that I experienced, or key emotions and feelings, if you want to call them that: disconnect from coaches, disconnect from teammates, disconnect from family and friends. I felt that I didn't have worth or value because I wasn't playing. And I let things get into my head like, oh, coach isn't talking to me as much, or my teammates aren't talking to me as much because I can't play. But in reality, I was just creating that myth in my mind. And so then when I got cut, it was that same feeling times a million that I experienced when I was injured. Because when you're injured, you have a timeline of when you can get back. And you're still working out, doing things with the teams, but you still have that missing amplification of practice and play. But when I got cut, it was this times a million because there was no end in sight. It was all of a sudden, well, I have no idea who I am. The only thing I thought I was good at the last 23 years of my life is now gone, and I no longer have it, and it's never coming back. Right. And so now it's learning, well, who am I? What does that even mean? And how do I get myself to a point where I like the person I see staring at me back?
Right. And that's the journey that happens when we face, some of those challenges of, grappling and dealing with identity. And so, I kind of would like to invite you to kind of share kind of how that experience and kind of how you navigated that, and now how you help other athletes also navigate with that, especially, with younger athletes who deal with injury and so on.
Yeah, great question. So how I navigated at the time probably wasn't the best. It was a learning experience for me.
Right.
I think it's important to start with, exactly kind of what I went through and how I started to transition out of it. And so when I got cut, right, I think, if you lack of a better term, was sitting in pity. And every day I just stopped taking care of myself. I wasn't training. I wasn't eating right. I wasn't sleeping properly. I was filling myself in negative things, watching negative sports talk shows, listening to negative music, and just really sitting in this cesspool of negativity and pity. And it got to a point where literally, like, I remember looking at myself and being like, I can't do this every day. I can't be this person who sits in just in this filth of nothingness. And so for me, I had to, one, understand what I was going through. And then two, I had to find ways to make actionable changes to become someone who I at least wish to be. So it started with me talking with former teammates, current athletes, former athletes, coaches, trainers, and just being like, what is it like if you experience this? And clearly I found out I was not the only person who's gone through this. It's becoming much more prevalent, particularly, I think basketball players do a great job of talking about it. I think JJ Redick has been extremely vocal about the transition out of athletics. And you learn it comes back to that identity piece. And so for me, I had to learn and kind of create who I was and understand who I was. So that first comes back to understanding, well, why did I even love football in the first place? And why do we love sports? And we have to be honest, we have to recognize there is ego involved. There's not an athlete in this world that doesn't love sports because of ego reasons. Perks, fame, recognition, right? Even on a small scale, right? And that's part of it. And that's okay. And you have to be willing to admit that. Because then once you can admit that, then you can learn how to eliminate that piece. Okay, well, I don't need external validation anymore. Or at least I can, pick and choose who I get external validation from, whether it's my wife, whether it's my parents, or whether it's, someone who I care about and trust. That's a brother figure, or whatever you want to call it. So really narrowing the circle of external validation you're willing to take some from, and make sure that they don't care whether I'm an athlete or not. Okay. And then number two is understanding, well, why did I love football in the first place? Why do I love sports outside of ego? And for me, I recognized that it was, I love a physical, mental, and emotional challenge. I love the adrenaline rush. I love putting myself in situations where I have to fight out of it, where I am challenged and I have to work through it. So then it's, okay, now how can I do this on a daily basis? And how can I apply this to a larger picture of life? And so I looked at my relationships, I looked at my faith, and then I looked at, business and career. And how can I apply that in each one of those levels? Right. And so then it comes down to making choices. And then I'm choosing, okay, every single day to get my physical challenge, I'm going to work out. And do I miss that sometimes? Yeah, absolutely. But I've become someone who loves a physical challenge. So it's much easier for me on the days I don't want to wake up and go to the gym because that's part of who I am. I love that physical challenge. And that's the emotional challenge, right? And what does that mean? And so for me, it's I love putting myself in a situation where I have to control my emotions. And I think anyone who has kids can understand that's every single day. But before I had kids, right, it's understanding how to communicate. She was my fiance at the time, learning how to communicate with her, learning how to communicate with my family, learning how to set up, what I call standards. Some people call them boundaries. I call them standards. And I say, this is the standard of what it's like to get my energy, to get my emotions directed towards you. If you don't meet this, then I'm sorry. It's nothing personal. It's just you're not serving a purpose in my life anymore. Right. And then spiritually, it's I have to learn why I believe what I believe and become deeper involved in that faith. And so for me, it doesn't fit everybody, but I'm, a devout Catholic. And so I go to church every Sunday and I try and live out every single day what it means to be a Catholic, treating people right, praying, spending time like with my family in prayer. So it's a combination of things, but first it starts with understanding, and then two, being willing to put together that action plan and kind of how you want to define it and really understanding like how deep do you
100%. And you, there's a lot of wisdom right there. And so I think really hitting on the two most important points that you touched on and you just wrapped up on for coaches to really help their athletes use their identity in a positive way is to get them to understand kind of some of those motives. And so, with that, I'm just kind of thinking about myself because I have two kind of hats I really wear that I work with coaches and with parents. So I'm a high school coach, and I also have my own kind of business where it's a basketball training business, but it's more importantly holistic development. And I feel like identity development is so important. So for a coach like myself, and I'm sure there's many other coaches that are listening as well, what's the first step that we can help guide our athletes to understand? Because I feel like when I ask questions, a lot of time I just like basketball, right? I just play it because my friends play it. But you gave a great answer where it's like you love the physical, emotional challenge. I'm sure you love the competitive aspect of having a score at the end.
Yeah, so it's tough, right? And there's a phrase I've frequently been hearing, and it's one I've begun to really adopt: is meeting athletes where they're at. And so, what does that actually mean? And some of meeting someone where they're at is maybe understanding you're not the one who can connect with them, and that's tough as a coach because you want to connect and you want to lead all your players. But when you realize and look back and reflect as a coach too, you have so many different levers you can pull, so many different people, right? So like for me, I know my spiritual lens isn't going to connect with every athlete. So I can't use that as a leading goalpost in how I coach athletes. But if I have an athlete who's very spiritual in their beliefs and it's differing from mine, we find that common ground. And then maybe I pull a lever of someone who I know has that same religious background who can help that person who's struggling with that in that moment. Right. And so for kids, 100%, it's like, why do you like basketball? It's like, well, I just like it. Right. Then it becomes, well, asking more targeted questions and learning more of that interview tactic. Like, hey, on a podcast, well, it's just asking the same questions out of curiosity for the kid. Well, it's like, well, maybe you like it because you like that one-on-one element, or maybe you like it because you get this feeling in your belly and you get real intense and it's the only time you feel strong, right? It's when you feel strongest. And just kind of learning to poke and pry and see what kind of answers you can get. Some athletes are very simple, right? They just are. They don't think deeper. They don't have that, deeper reasoning, and that's okay. It's just understanding that and then finding the levers to kind of pull the best performance out of them, finding what motivates them. Ask them, when do you have the most fun? When are you most driven? When are you most angry? Like, when do you want to hit something? And if you never want to hit something, well, it's like, well, when does something irritate you? Because at some point, everyone's going to be irritated. Everyone's going to be happy. Everyone's going to be joyful. Everyone's going to be sad. Everyone's going to experience some type of emotion. And it's understanding who experiences it and when.
Right. Yeah. So it's those targeted questions in terms of just really kind of continue to get to know them and what motivates them, like you said. And so when we kind of find out what motivates them, what are some certain action plans that you have worked with your athletes in terms of developing like a healthy kind of relationship with that identity where they love the physical challenge, the mental challenge, but they don't let the loss bog them down and get into sitting in pity, like you maybe talk about, um, because it's okay to feel frustrated and angry after a loss or after a performance, right? We don't want to be happy because we went 0 for 10 from 3 or whatever it is, right? But how do we make sure that it doesn't get wrapped up into our identity to where we bring that to the next game and the game after that?
Yeah, and I'm very much a believer you should care deeply about the outcome. Like you should. Like if you lose, particularly in a big game, and it doesn't like affect you in some capacity, I might be a little concerned, right? Like as a competitor, it should bother you. It should drive your action or drive change when you lose. It's just to be able to separate identity from outcome. You are more than just your outcome. And an analogy I heard once that I absolutely loved. It's like a surgeon who's doing surgery on someone. They put every bit of what they have into that surgery to make their patient better, curing whatever it is. But in the event that they can't cure that person, it's not their body, right? So our outcomes, our losses, our wins are not us, right? They're not who we are. Who we are is all the drive and effort and attention and energy we put into the outcome, but understanding that that outcome is not always reflective of who we are. It's a part of our process.
Right. And it's also oftentimes a learning tool, as you alluded to earlier, of how we can continue to improve our processes.
Absolutely. And I think too, like seeking feedback in win or loss is a skill set. It's very difficult to do. I just talked with a trainer who, is well known in the Pittsburgh area for training professional athletes, and I do some work with them. And we were talking about like what's the difference between athletes who get it and athletes who don't. And we reminisced over a few athletes who are always asking for feedback. We'll pick up the phone and call you, hey, this isn't going my way. How can I get better? Like no sugarcoating, like just tell me straight up, what am I not doing? What am I not seeing? How can I improve? And the younger that we can adopt that, the sooner, regardless again of outcome and becoming again, I don't like outcomes really important. Okay. Like they are. At the end of the day, outcomes matter. But how we get better outcomes is being obsessed with feedback, being obsessed with taking action and finding the different pillars that come to performance in whatever field you're in. If we're talking about athletics, physical performance, mental performance, recovery, nutrition, diet, finding those pillars and always seeking feedback in those pillars and how you can get better, right? And doing that and becoming obsessed with that process is going to lead to more outcomes. It's just being able to understand that like the outcome itself is not indicative of who you are, and understanding, you're a son or a daughter, you're a brother or sister, you're an aunt or an uncle, some people your parents, right? But even deeper than that, you're someone who is empathetic, you're someone who cares deeply about the work that you do, you're someone who's tough or gritty, right? And being able to understand that there's elements of you that can't be taken away regardless of the outcome.
Right. Right. And to tap into those as well and just like recognize that those are very worthy roles in terms of belonging. Because I feel like a lot of times this is kind of what it stems from is, and you could probably share this as well when you were kind of transitioning out and talking about, again, referencing the sitting in pity is like feeling like we belong. And I feel like that's one of the reasons we love sports so much. We feel like, even as fans, right? We talk about
It's a
teams
sense
like
of
as,
community.
right. It's a we, even though we're not even playing on the field and we some of us have never even been inside the stadium, but it's that belonging that matters so much.
Yeah, and I think to be honest with you, after athletics, even sometimes in athletics, you're always searching for that community. And I actually just wrote a piece in my newsletter today. Is I'm in that like lonely stage right now. I'm growing out of old circles and I'm trying to find new circles that I just haven't found yet. And I think as an athlete and as a person, you're always looking for a sense of community and the right people to surround yourself with. And to be honest, in today's society, it's never easier to reach out and find someone. And yet, to be honest, we are the most lonely generation ever. And I think, I don't want to, that could be a whole podcast episode in itself as to why that is. But that sense of community, at the end of the day, it's just finding the right people, finding the people who are going to push you to be a better version of who you want to be. And sometimes that's within your team, sometimes it's outside of your team. When it's not people on your team, that's what makes it a little challenging. And when you leave the game, that's the hardest part, is remaining and finding new people.
No, and I think, kind of with that, and the athletes that I work with a lot of high school athletes, and they are, of course, we all know that they're on their phones more than ever. And I just feel like it's normal. Like, I'll share this little bit of a story in terms of, like, I was talking to some of my kids, and they were like, they play video games together, not in the same room anymore. Like, at least when I was playing, I'm not that old, right? So I had video games too, but we'd play video games together in the same room. But like he had said, like, that's weird if you play video games together in the same room, right? They're like on a mic headset, and like, I guess they're talking, communicating. I guess it's probably a little better than texting, but just like finding that community and that in-person interaction is so important for athletes. I feel like this day and age, just to have the social skills to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's funny that this comes up in a lot of different conversations, but as coaches and parents, listening to this, and in general, we, again, goes back to meeting the athlete where they're at. Even my generation, and I'm young, I'm 28, like, we still didn't have these temptations. Like, have you guys ever put on a game console and seen how realistic some of this stuff is? Like,
It's crazy.
it's incredible. It's fascinating. And we didn't have those temptations. So it's like, even saying like that's stupid. Like, yeah, hey, maybe it is in our perspective, in the unique lens that we view the world. But from a kid who's grown up with it, that's real. Like, that's tempted and put in front of them every single day. So you don't have to completely obliterate it, right? And completely make the athlete feel unheard, but maybe limit and put some like restrictions, like, hey, yeah, you can go play with your friends on the video game, but you better believe you better get your butt outside and go play, right? And it's like having that balance, right? And it's hard to always find balance. I actually don't like that word, but it's allowing for some of those things to go on, but being able to set limits that are effective and fair.
That makes a lot of sense. And I kind of, as I was hearing you talk about that, I know one of the things we wanted to touch on it is about kind of alleviating some of that pressure from a coach's perspective, because kind of staying on topic of, video games, right? Obviously, social media comes up quite a bit in this podcast, and just because the likes and the comments and the followers, that is a big part of this generation's ego, and even probably to a certain extent our own. Pretty comfortable with, I don't really care to a certain extent, right? I mean, I don't want to have zero,
Right.
but this generation, they it really matters to them. And so as coaches, how can we help alleviate some of that pressure that comes from social media and ego, and just like that performance, the pressure to perform?
It's a great point, right? And I don't think there's a clear cut answer. I think the clearest cut answer is just don't engage. In our world, we can't do that, right? Like, to be honest, like you said, you don't want zero. The truth is, we both care, right? Because our podcast and our businesses likely depend on it to some type of degree. So it's less about the likes in the retweets or the repost, and maybe more of understanding what those signify, right? So if I make a post, right, it's not that I want the likes for the sake of the like. It's that I want to know that I'm making a better impact, or it's resonating with more people. And to be honest, at some point, it can facilitate business opportunity, right? And that's okay. Like, that is okay to want those things. It's okay to want to be liked. It's just learning kind of where to draw that line of where that like or post is distracting from who you actually are, right? And so, again, coming back to identity, it's, hey, am I posting something because I actually want some type of gratification? So, like, if I post something that's popular political on one side or the other because I'm trying to pander to a certain demographic of people, even though I don't believe in it, that's what's going to harm you. That's what's going to hurt you, right? Or if it's posting, some type of picture activity because I want to make, particularly like young kids, right? I want to make my significant other jealous, and I want to get all these likes, and then I don't get it. Then it's like, oh, that hurt me. When if you can put intention and a reason behind your post, and still it's okay to want those likes and use it as a test to be like, okay, well, what's resonating with others? Or, again, describe reason X why you're posting, and then use it just kind of as it is, right? Or like posting for a purpose, like to connect with someone. Like, hey, I might post a picture of my family because I want people to know what's going on in my life, people that I haven't connected with in a while. And you'd be surprised how many people will just reach out of nowhere when you post something that resonates with them. So just kind of changing and putting intent behind everything that you do and doing everything on purpose with good intent. And then you can kind of navigate the like and retweet world. Um, in general, I do think social media, it can be pretty toxic. But if you learn how to curate your environment to be things that you enjoy or things that uplift you, then you can kind of start to get past those likes and engagement piece.
Right. And honestly, as I hear you talking about that, I feel like that could be a really powerful workshop. And I'm curious, have you done that for your athletes in terms of like helping them curate that? Because I'm like thinking, because they're going to be on it no matter what. So it's like teaching them at least giving them the opportunity to understand what's in their feed and how it may be affecting them.
Right. And it's funny, we have a couple workshops coming up. That's not one that we have planned yet. It is one of importance. So, some advice I would give if you're curating your environment, your Twitter, or I guess X now, or Instagram or TikTok, is it's a big algorithm, and it's just a mathematical process of the things that you're liking, the things that you're reposting, the things that you're spending more time watching, the things that you're retweeting, the things that you're clicking and sharing. The algorithm takes those things into account, and it'll start giving you more of that. And what's so tricky, and where the algorithm gets you, and where really popular accounts get you, is they post things that make you want to engage more often than not from a negative lens, right? Things of controversy, things that'll draw you in because it's like, ooh, this may be controversial. But if you want to start getting uplifting things, it's finding those accounts that, one, provide actionable advice on how to do things better. I love motivational stuff. Finding motivational accounts, I think motivation can be kind of nonsense, but if you're actually able to find an underlying message and make it applicable, that's great. And I'd rather you have motivational stuff on your feed than controversy. And then three, it's just finding people you look up to who post good messages out in the world, who you want to emulate and you want to embody. Start retweeting those things, start commenting on those things, start reposting them, start sharing them with friends, and then they'll begin to start coming to you. And then don't be afraid to use the mute and the block button. Big proponent of those. You have a bunch of negative people or people that you can't stand or whatever, or posts that keep coming up and you're like, I don't like this. Mute, block, unfollow. Just become a master at that. Sometimes elimination is better than adding.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I feel like it's an incredibly important message, and looking up to and finding people that like resonate with your message, it's just so important. Unfortunately, that's where they're going to spend at least probably 30 minutes to an hour of their time. If not, some people are probably spending way more. And so how can we help them build healthier relationships with that instead of just saying don't use it, right? It's just at this point, there may be the select few kids who don't use it at all, but like it's ingrained. It's a part of their culture and their ability to connect with other kids. So,
And I would say
um,
this one last point on this topic,
yeah,
because what you just said there is really important, is they are so accustomed to it. And you can find yourself scrolling and just get caught in a daze scrolling. Set a time limit and start blocking off time on your day to engage in social media. Like, if you really enjoy social media or it's part of your business or process, set time and then set a timer and do it. And then when the timer goes off, boom, I close it, I'm on to something else. And always set a follow up task after. So it's like, all right, here's my time for social media, 30 minutes, whatever. I'm going to scroll endlessly. I'm going to look, retweet, comment, whatever. But immediately after, when that alarm goes off, I have another activity I got to get to. So whether it's training, whether it's sleeping, whether it's homework, whatever it is, set something immediately after so you can close it and be like, it's, instead of saying like, oh, I have an extra hour before I have to do anything, I'll just scroll a little bit more. It's like, no, I have to go do something right now.
right. And that takes self discipline too, to be like, I got to go training. I'm done. And so that's
Yep.
one of the beauties of sports too, is being able to teach that and teaching that self discipline. So that's really huge. And as we kind of shift into the latter half of our conversation, I want to kind of touch back on and bring it back less to social media, back to kind of just the performance, the coaching, the practice world. And so talking about coaches can put a lot of pressure on athletes. So how can coaches help alleviate some of that pressure on their athletes?
I think the relationship we have with pressure as athletes is unique. The feeling of that pressure creates us or causes us to catastrophize into everything that can go wrong. So from an athlete lens, we have to start putting our energy into what could go right. So if you're a coach and you're trying to emphasize how can we put our energy into things that can go right, it's, I think first and foremost, every athlete should know that their coach cares about them personally. So if you can make that at the forefront of everything that you do, that you care about them as young men and young women, regardless of how they perform, then either consciously or subconsciously, they're going to know when they're in those pressure moments that you have their back. And two, be over communicative in the fact that in those pressure moments, that's why you practice. They're prepared because of what you've done in practice and meetings up to this point. And being able to practice those over and over in practice situations, I think it's in football, right? Relentlessly practicing 2-minute drill. Or if you're on a defense, 4-minute drill. Or if you're in an offense, 4-minute drill, right? In each scenario, practice that over and over again. So when you get in the game, it's, I'm ready for this. We've done it so many times and I can reflect back on all the times I've practiced this. Okay. And then it becomes from the coach's job to understand, hey, you guys that are in these moments, in pressure moments, you're there for reasons because we trust you. We are trusting you in this moment to do this, and we know you can do it. And guess what? If you can't or you fail once, you are not a failure. We're just going to get up, we're going to get on the horse, and we're going to do it again until we get it right. And it's not necessarily that you can alleviate, like get rid of the pressure. It's understanding your relationship with the pressure and how the coach can create an environment where we're practicing pressure situations all the time. And then when we get in there, we're ready because we're prepared. Two, we know you care about us, or that's really point number one. And then three, it's regardless of the outcome, we're just going to get back after it again.
Right. So yeah, just summarizing, you got to, number one, and we talk about this, I feel like it's almost in every single episode. You got to care
100%.
more about the athlete than you got to care more about the person than the athlete. And then making sure, obviously preparation is a big one, right? Making sure that if you as an athlete want to earn your coach's trust, you have to be preparing on your own time in the off season, like, certain skills, right? So if you want to be a better 3-point shooter, you got to shoot more. Want to be a better hitter in baseball, right? That's a lot of your own time. So making sure you're prepared. And then as a coach, making sure we prepare our players for certain situations that happen in pressure. And then, just finally, when we do fail, because it's going to happen, and that's the beauty of sports, making sure we use that as a learning opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So I think with that, what are some of the best ways that we as coaches can help our athletes learn from those failure opportunities?
So I want to make sure I answer this correctly, because sometimes when you lose, sometimes when you win, right? The learning opportunity piece, and I'm nitpicking language. It's less about the learning opportunity and more about how quickly can we just get back up and go back to tomorrow or getting better, right? Because sometimes you lose, right? And I'm going to pick golf. Sometimes you miss a putt and that costs you $1 million. You might have done everything right, but the wind may have blown wrong, right? Or it may have hit a little bump on the surface that you didn't see, and it rims out, right? Or something out of your control happens and you lose, and it's $1 million gone that you can never essentially get back in that moment. So it's less about maybe learning what to do better, and maybe more one, experiencing the emotions of loss and failure, right? Let that hit you. And then quickly, and the process is different for everyone, but the quicker we can get from this sucks, it's so hard to get back to where I just was, all the hard work, all the effort, and it came to nothing. It's quickly trying to flip that switch, experience those emotions, and be like, all right, let's get back after it. I know exactly what I need to do. I know how to get back here. And next time I get to this moment, I'm going to make the putt. I'm going to make the shot. I'm going to make the tackle. I'm going to make the catch. And if I fail in that moment again, it's going to hurt. It might hurt worse than it just did, but I'm going to know I can get back to it because I just did it. And so when you can reflect, again, a lot of it is action and reflecting on action. And so it's experiencing those emotions in that moment. Don't shield yourself from them, but it's how quickly can I get back on the horse and just getting back to work to earn the right to be back here again.
100%. And I'm guessing that's a big reason and a big philosophy of why you wanted to start athletic fortitude, and why you named it that is because, in sports, it provides us with that opportunity to get back on the horse and to try and try again. Like it's failure is just a part of sports, and you have to be able to stomach that to continue moving forward and to reach your highest potential.
Absolutely. And it's why I make being fortuitous part of my identity. Because in order to earn that, in order to earn the right to say I'm full of fortitude, I have to go through hard things because that's the price it takes. So when we're picking our identity or engineering our identity is the terminology I use with my athletes. It's if you want something to be a part of your identity, then you have to be willing to pay that price. So if I want to be courageous, I can't live an easy life. If I want to be empathetic, I can't be a jerk. So it's understanding who you want to be, understanding what it takes to get there, what is that price to be paid, and then living that out. So to be fortuitous, to have fortitude, if I lose or if I win, I have to be willing to overcome regardless. And it's get back up, do it again.
And that's an important part of your identity. And I love how that's something that you've built in and engineered, as you've said. And so, kind of my final question would be like, what like piece of advice would you leave off with this on this episode for the coaches and parents that help their athletes that they work with and my athletes I'm listening as well, become more fortuitous and live a life that's going to help them in their sports experience maximize their time beyond the scoreboard?
I think there's a lot. So if I were to pick one, right, when it comes to everything is start small, get really good, and then expand. Right? Get really, really good at the 99%. Don't chase the 1%. And what I mean by that is if you can get really good at understanding who you are, if you can get really good at understanding your feelings and emotions, if you can get really good at training right, eating right, getting the correct, mindset help, sleeping right, all the other stuff will come to fruition. Don't just go start taking a million different supplements if you're not doing anything else right. So if you're an athlete, if you're a coach, if you're a parent, it's finding something. What's one thing small today that I can do to improve? What is one thing small today that I want to incorporate into my identity? And then start doing it. And then once you get good at that, once you master that, find something new. And for parents, I think the biggest thing where we can all start to get better is the car ride home from practice, the car ride home from games. Give that separation. There's no need to coach your kid extra hard. There's no need to beat your kid down immediately after. Let those emotions and feelings fester. Give the kids a safety net, not a safe space, but a safety net to know where, regardless of the outcome of their sport, they can just feel okay and not feel overwhelmed and crushed. And I think that's the biggest mistake we make as parents is we want to jump down our kid's throat when we get in the car. I'm a big proponent of that car ride should be a safe haven for no sport talk. And I'm actually a big proponent of going out to eat after a game. Now, obviously, late night games, you can't as much, but doing something separate from sport that allows your kid to decompress and know that that is not their entire life. And then as coaches, right, it really comes down, you got to understand your athletes. You got to find ways to have conversation with them outside of sport. You got to have ways to find what they love, what they enjoy outside of sport, who's important to them, why they love sport. And then you can start to help them build their own or engineer their own little identities.
I love that. And so with that, I actually do have a follow-up question for the parents that you kind of gave that advice and the importance of the car. And just can you share a little bit behind the science behind and the importance behind why that safe space in the car is so important and critical for our athletes' long-term development?
Yeah, so it really comes down to you don't want to feel that your parents' love depends on your performance in a game, right? And whether that's our intention or not, if every time our kid performs poorly, whether that's for effort, whether that's for a mental error, whether that's just for a physically poor performance, if every single time we are beating them down and grilling them the second they get into a car or heaping praise when they do play well or do give, whatever it is, If we're giving praise or constantly beating them, we begin as athletes to associate, and young kids are worthy, are worth to performance. And so you want to be able to give those kids a space, and that's why you have coaches, so your parents don't have to coach 24/7. And it can be like, hey, like there's a separate, unconscious separation when that kid steps into that car. It's, yeah, hey, talk about whatever, how was school today, hey, that girl you asked out, how'd that go, or whatever it is. And just being able to separate and to draw a metaphoric line as soon as you get in that car, that it is okay and whatever just happened. And if your kid initiates the conversation, that's okay. Hey, we can talk about it. Ask questions, seek curiosity. Don't be judgmental of your kid's performance. Just be curious about it. Well, how did they feel? And let them guide the discussion if they want to have it. But the parent should not be dictating it. And if it's an effort thing, I get it. That's really hard. That's a conversation for later in a much more calm state of mind. So it's after dinner, the next day, whatever, come back and talk about the effort piece, but not immediately after, not in the car ride, not at dinner.
I love that. And I like that you shared the important part about, it's just, we don't want them to associate their identity with their outcomes.
You just don't want your worth to be the outcome. And it's being able to understand my parents still love me regardless. And I know every parent in the world will say, of course I love my kid. But it's just the action of jumping down my kid's throat in an angry tone or a judgmental tone every time they perform poorly, or my mood completely changing whenever they play well. And that's the tough part as a parent, is because obviously you're joyful when your kid plays well and you're upset when they don't because you want them to do well. But being able as a parent to control your emotion and be able to remove your emotion from action.
That is a great last piece of wisdom to drop for all of our parents, coaches, and athletes that are listening. Where can those that are listening subscribe to the newsletter and find you on social media?
Yeah, so everything we have, go to athleticfortitude.com. You can find my newsletter. You can find my podcast, YouTube channel, all my weekly writings. If you want to follow me on social media, my name is hard to hear phonetically. I apologize. It's at Colin Jonov 10. That's COLKYJONOV 10. I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. And if you want to follow my Instagram page for the business, it is at athletic.fortitude.
Right on. Appreciate your time today, Colin. I got 2 pages of notes. I'm ready to help my athletes kind of build a healthier identity with sports. So I appreciate it.
Nah, I really appreciate you having me on, man. It's a great thing you're doing here. And any way I can be of support, you let me know. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend, coach, or parent you feel like would get value from this episode. It's our responsibility to impact as many parents and coaches who are the ones that are impacting our athletes. That's how we create a ripple effect. So thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to serving you all next week.